Hi, my name's Joanne Clark. I'm a careers counsellor at RMIT University and I'm here to talk to you today about jobs of the future. This session is part of RMIT's digital outreach project. So what will we be covering? First of all, we'll talk about why it's important to discuss jobs of the future. Things like how technology, social change and globalisation can affect jobs, and how you can plan for a job of the future. So why do we need to discuss jobs of the future? Well, many of you will be heading towards the end of secondary school and you'll have some big choices to make about what you do when you finish. Often people, when they're making those choices, are motivated by the type of work they want to do. Work's important to people because it helps you build self-esteem and self-confidence. It helps you feel like you're contributing to society. It also helps you to afford the essentials and non-essentials of life. The thing to consider is that no job is guaranteed to be around in the future, and we're facing a rapid rate of change at the moment. But with some of the information available, you can make informed decisions about what the prospects are like for the things you're considering. You can also use that information to take advantage of new and emerging job opportunities. And you also need to consider the types of skills that will help you successfully navigate future career changes that you might have. So let's have a look at just a couple of examples of how the world around us has changed. In the past, in every suburb, pretty much in every regional area of Australia, you'd find in the towns bookstores, video stores, music stores. These are much harder to find now, and that's because we get our information digitally. We download these things to our computers, to our phones, to our other portable devices. We also get our phone communications in that way, so we no longer have switchboards or switchboard operators who connected our calls. Even simple things like photographs. Your family probably have photo albums at home with the photographs in them. They used to be handed in, a film was handed in from the camera into the photography store. They would then be sent off to manufacturers who'd produce the photographs, be sent back and then provided to your families. These days we take photographs on our phones, we keep them digitally and we store them digitally. We can print them if we want. Even in the financial sector, most of our transactions were done face-to-face. We'd go into the bank if we needed to do any kind of financial transactions. We can do this today, but most people choose to do this online. They do all their banking online. They communicate with their institutions, their financial institutions online. So things have changed a lot. Let's now have a look at the example of the mobile phone. It might seem ridiculous to you now, but everything on your screen were things that were regularly used in Australian homes. These things had to be produced either in Australia or overseas, and then made available or imported to Australia and sold here for Australian families. All the functions of these things are now available to you on your phone. So let's reflect a little bit now on these examples. I think you'll see that technology has driven a lot of change in Australia, and we're now going to have a look at how this technology has now impacted on the Australian labour market and how it might impact in the future. By changing the way we do things, technology also drives change in the job market, and this can be in a variety of ways. It can reduce the demand for some existing jobs and increase demand for others. It can unfortunately also make some jobs obsolete or no longer needed. It can create fantastic and exciting new jobs and new opportunities. It can also change the way we work. We're now going to look at some specific examples to illustrate this. Let's go back to our example of our mobile phone. I'm going to look specifically at the phone directory to give you an example of the impact on the job market of the change we've been talking about. The Yellow Pages was a services and goods directory that provided information about goods and services available in Australia, and it was distributed to every single household in Australia. In order to produce it, there needed to be timber growers to grow the timber that helped produce the paper. There was a demand for jobs in the paper manufacturing industry to produce the paper, and there was also demand for printers to produce the printed copy of the Yellow Pages. There was then a requirement for all those Yellow Pages to be distributed across Australia to every household. So truck drivers and distributors were in demand to do that, or were employed to do that. With the change for the Yellow Pages to move online, then there has been a reduction in the demand for jobs in that paper manufacturing area and distribution area, and an increase in the IT related technologies. So web designers and developers, IT experts, electrical engineers or computer engineers, all of those things are now required to produce those Yellow Pages online. So you can see the significant shift from a paper-based resource to an online resource. So you can multiply that across many of the examples that you can think of, where things are now no longer in paper format but are online. The next example of technology that I'm going to talk about is around artificial intelligence, and specifically the introduction of driverless cars. Testing's already commenced, and I'm sure it won't be long until we see the introduction of driverless cars. There's some fantastic positives to society on driverless cars in reducing the number of crashes and therefore the injury and death on our roads. There is, however, a potential impact on our job market. Although there's likely to be a reduction in driver-based occupations like truck drivers, perhaps even train drivers with the potential introduction to driverless trains and taxi drivers, there's also a likely increase in other areas. So engineering technologies, electrical communications engineering, technical support around those things, design and advanced manufacturing type roles. There's also likely to be a need for change in some of the occupations that already exist. So our mechanics, for example, although already being introduced and well understanding computer technology in relation to cars, are going to have to continue to upgrade their skills in order to maintain driverless cars. So you can see here in just one example how it has the impact of increasing some areas, decreasing others, and changing other jobs in our labour market. More sophisticated technology has certainly changed the way we shop, and as a result of that has changed the way jobs are structured in the retail industry. More and more of us are shopping online, both within Australia and overseas. It's increased the demands in the logistics field, in warehousing, in transport, but it's reduced the jobs in front of house retail positions. If we look specifically at supermarkets, even our in-store experience has changed. In the past, a checkout operator would scan our goods and pack them ready for us to pay and leave. These days, the area of self-service has increased a great deal, with more and more checkout operators being replaced by self-serve, and it's caused a decrease in that area. As we've seen, new technologies can change the demand for particular jobs, but it can also change the way we work. With the introduction of disruptive technologies like Airtasker, Uber, Airbnb that challenge the way things have done previously, many people have seen opportunities to gain employment in these fields. But what this means is that they're often working as self-employed or contractors. Whilst this gives them the flexibility to work where and when they like, it also means that they have to have business skills. They need to be able to manage their own small business in order to be successful. This often means they have to learn or take on new skills, or entrepreneurial skills as we might call them, in order to be successful. The introduction of new technologies is not the only thing driving this change in the job market. There are many reasons why more and more people are becoming contractors and self-employed, but it is something that you'll have to think about for your future. Not only will it be necessary to gain the skills that you require for a specific job, but you'll also have to think about what it means to run your own business and be self-employed. So what about new jobs and new industries that didn't exist 5 or so years ago? This isn't meant to be an exhaustive list, but just some examples for you to consider about how new technology has driven the need for new jobs. Let's look at the industry around cybersecurity. We've talked a lot about the online environment previously. All of us do a lot of our online banking, our purchasing of retail online, and we want to be sure that the information we're giving to people, to organisations, is secure. So what sort of jobs work in the cybersecurity space? Well, there's obviously things like IT programmers, network and systems engineers, also data analysts, all things that have contributed to the cybersecurity industry, and are all of which are growing at the moment. The others I'll leave to you to investigate further. There's loads of resources around, and I'm sure your careers advisor at school can talk to you more about each of these things, as well as other things not on this list. We've had a look in quite a bit of detail now about how technology influences the job market, and we're now going to look at some other influences on that same job market. One of the changes in society that really needs to be looked at is the fact that Australia has an ageing population. You might be wondering what that's got to do with the job market, but we'll have a bit more look in detail. As this graphic shows, over time, a greater proportion of Australians are in the category of 65 years and older. What that means is those people are more likely to be working fewer hours or retired. They're also more likely to be living longer because of improved health services and medical interventions. So what does that mean for you now as people about to enter the labour market? We're going to explore that through an activity that you'll do with your teacher to discuss some of the implications. What I want you to consider are what are some of the jobs that are likely to be in demand over the next 10 years, given that the fact that we now have a higher proportion of people over 65. Once you've had a chance to discuss this, we'll come back and talk about it together. Hopefully you got some discussion going with that activity. Here's some of my answers, but you may have others that I don't have here. Let's go through them. As I mentioned, not only will we have more people over 65, but they'll also be living longer. So therefore they'll need a range of health-related occupations to help support them, to keep them as physically fit and active as possible. Things like nurses, doctors, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, speech pathologists are just a few of those. We'll also need support workers. These are people who work in aged care facilities or in people's own home to do everyday activities with elderly people. There are also leisure activities officers whose aim is to keep people moving in order to improve their quality of life. And there are community services workers like social workers, welfare workers, who help people when things go wrong, who are liaison between the elderly and services to assist their particular needs. There's also community development workers. As we have a higher proportion of people getting older, then there's a need within the community sector to develop services to cope with people of this age or to cater for them. And these community development workers will be working on these things. As I said, these are just a few, but they are things that are going to be in demand. Globalisation is a process by which the world is becoming increasingly interconnected as a result of massive increases in both trade and cultural exchange. Some of the results of globalisation include increases in international trade, the number of companies operating not just nationally but internationally, and freer movement of goods and services as they move between countries. A good example of how globalisation has impact on the job market in Australia is in the automotive industry. As you can see in the first picture here, originally production lines relied very heavily on people physically putting cars together. The second diagram shows with technology and the use of robotics, the number of people required on that production line was heavily reduced. In the third diagram, it shows the impact of globalisation, as many car manufacturers in Australia have closed down their operations because they were able to produce their cars much more cheaply overseas, that therefore meaning the closure of companies here. People who were originally involved in producing cars are now having to look for work elsewhere. They're having to retrain and build new skills for new jobs that they will move into. Let's look now at some of the opportunities that have come about in the Australian job market because of globalisation. As I mentioned, many companies now operate internationally with offices throughout different continents. This can create opportunities for people working in those organisations to use their skills internationally, to not just work in Australia, but work overseas as well. The increase in international business has also grown the logistics areas as people import and export goods with fewer restrictions than were previously the case. Those goods have to get around to consumers. Things like shipping, air freight, warehousing and trucking are all growth areas in Australia, both because we import goods and we export some goods as well. Foreign languages are now much more in demand than they were previously. For companies working internationally, they value multilingual employees, and it's something that you could be thinking about to add to your skill set. You also are able to access bigger markets. So those companies or those people with entrepreneurial skills who are developing new businesses in Australia now look at markets not just in Australia but overseas as well. They look to build multinational companies that can offer their goods and services to the world. So how do you future-proof your career to take advantage of some of the opportunities we've discussed today and negate some of the negatives? There's lots of things you could be doing now that'll make you more employable in the future. First of all, let's talk about what employability skills are. They can be defined as a transferable skill needed by an individual to make them employable. They're skills that most employers are looking for no matter what job that is involved. They can be transferred from one job to another, and you can pick them up outside of the work environment in things like extracurricular activities, in volunteer work, in work experience, but also in everyday activities and how you interact with your family and friends, in sporting teams, etc. What are some of the skills employers are looking for? The most common ones that employers are looking for are things like academic skills, interpersonal and communication skills, technical skills, leadership skills, team skills, problem-solving skills, and digital or technological skills. From this list of the most common skills employers are looking for, discuss as a group what you would rank as the skill that employers most highly value in prospective employees. Then we'll get back together and see how many of you were right in selecting the right answer. Okay, so how many of you got interpersonal communication skills as your answer? If you did, well done. For the last 10 years of employer surveys, interpersonal communication skills has ranked as the highest skill required by employers, no matter what industry they came from or no matter what jobs they recruited for. So why is it so important? It's important to be able to listen to instructions, to clarify where you don't understand, to communicate your message to others so that they understand what you're trying to say. Sometimes it's also important to be able to speak publicly or speak in public to large groups or small groups. It's also important to respond appropriately and professionally with other people in your work. So how do you develop these skills? And if you already have them, how do you improve them? Think about each of the employability skills on the list that we looked at previously and give yourself a rating for it. For those that you think need development, think about creative ways that you could look at to improve in those areas, things that you could be doing now to help improve yourself in each of those skills. This is going to stand you in good stead not only for that first move out of secondary school, but also throughout your career. You need to be constantly improving these. It also helps you when changing career in making the transition from one career to the other, because remember, these are skills that all employers value. There's loads of things you can be doing to think about what you're going to be doing in the future. A good starting point is to explore your interests and think about how these interests might relate to particular jobs, either now or in the future. For those of you who haven't done this already, I've provided a handout with this workshop with links to resources to help you explore these things. As we've seen, it's also important to research future job prospects in order to be informed about the choices that you make. It doesn't mean that we always choose jobs that have good job prospects. Many of us follow our passions into jobs and there may not be prospects in them. But it's important to make an informed decision rather than be surprised that there are no prospects at the end or not as many prospects as you might have hoped at the end of your studies or your training or whatever you choose to do at the end of your secondary schooling. The other thing that's important is to keep up with what's happening in the job market. As we've seen, things can influence and change things very quickly. The way to do this is to stay on top of current affairs through media and other research. There's always new research coming out about the labour market that's readily available online. And as I said, just to repeat, keep working on those employabilities, skills. Think about how you can get work experience or volunteering work or part-time work, or you can do activities in the community or at school that can help build those. Okay, so we're nearly at the end of the workshop. I've got one last activity for you to do, and this one is using a resource that I'd recommend for looking at the current and future job prospects of various jobs available to you. I've also provided a handout with links to other resources that can help you with the decisions you'll need to make between now and when you finish school. I hope you find them useful. Your teacher will guide you through the activity as well as using the Jobs of the Future activity sheet. Your teacher will also go through some of the answers with you. Well, I hope you found this workshop useful. And I hope that you can use some of the information to make your transition out of school a little easier and perhaps even for future career changes. I wish you well.